This discussion on the fundamentals of the New Zealand Screen Production Rebate was recorded live during the 2023 SPADA conference.
Welcome everybody. I'm joined today by Richard Fletcher from Libertine and by Sharon Menzies from Hinterland. And we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive into the rebate fundamentals and things you need to know about it. Last year at the SPADA conference, there was a little bit of uncertainty around what was going to be happening with the rebate. What's changed in the year since then?
It's sort of deja vu, but not, thankfully, because you're hearing from me again this year, and I did a panel on the rebate last year. You'll be pleased to know I now have bifocal glasses so I can read, for those who remember last year. But yeah, I think last year there was obviously we were waiting to hear on the merger and unsure what impact that would have on NZ On Air funding. And more fundamentally in respect of what was then the SPIG, we were very unsure where that was going because there were the recommendations with a very heavy cultural overlay. And certainly, the mood in the room at that time was, please don't mess with it, and we've got a good thing, leave it intact. And I think we're in a much, much better place, thankfully, this year with the fact that the review has occurred. Obviously, the merger hasn't happened. NZ On Air has retained its funding. But fundamentally, with the now SPUR, we have a degree of certainty. And I certainly noted in James Cameron's thing, talking about the uncertainty of funding. And it was a very disruptive 12-month period whilst that review was happening. So to have that certainty is a huge relief. And the huge win that we have had that you can now co-fund with New Zealand On Air, which is, I would say is a bigger change as we've had since the implementation of what was originally the SPIF back in 2008. It has the potential to be a real game changer, both by growing the amount of funding effectively NZ On Air can spread, but also by growing the ambition, because it will necessitate producers to use the rebate and find international money.
Yeah, just building on that from Richard, I think last year you threw up a table or a graph that showed... From you. Yeah, that you copied from me. That showed, and I don't think the officials really clocked it at the time, but just how hard for New Zealand television producers when you compare to, say, Australia, where you've got broadcasters paying what is enormous amounts of money compared to what is paid here, and also Screen Australia, state agencies and producer offsets. So when Australian producers go to the market, they're going to the market with 60 to 80% of their funding secured, and which is an easy it's easy to go to the market with that, but New Zealand was severely disadvantaged. So the ability to use both the rebate and New Zealand On Air is huge. That's a game changer for New Zealand.
What are the actual rebates which are available to everybody at the moment? So that
I'll just go over it quickly, because obviously I expect 95% of you will be across things. But obviously we have the 40% for domestic production, which is capped at 6 million, with the ability to apply for the additional grant up to 15 million. There's the PDV for post-production, and there's the international rebate at 20 to 25. One of the another positive change that has come out of the review is the PDV threshold has dropped from 500,000 to 250,000. So for the likes of Grant and Images, that potentially could be quite a game changer as well in terms of making it more appealing to do post-production, either as a co-production in New Zealand or just, you may have a project that doesn't qualify, you can't meet the thresholds for the SPUR, you might be able to qualify for the PDV. So, that is another positive change. The other really positive change, and Sharon's better to talk to this, is the ability to apply for an interim final claim, which would significantly reduce interest costs. And Sharon and I have literally seen it recently on Series 3 of Under the Vines, which is currently shooting, where our initial numbers were done on the fact that you could only claim once completed. But now you can claim once you've expended a minimum of 50%. And it's literally almost, not quite, but it's probably reduced the interest bill by about 40%.
Yeah, so I'll tell the story. So 1 minute after the criteria was announced, I got a text from Richard that said, "What does this mean for me?" And I love spreadsheets, so that's good. So I ran the figures, and so what I basically allow for with an interim claim is that I assume that, and this is sort of like for New Zealand projects and not for co-productions, but I assume that after the shoot you've sort of spent, 60 to 70% of your budget. So I sort of allow like a month after the shoot to have a cost report that would be in a form that could go to the auditors. And when you go to the auditors, so it's not a double audit, it's almost like a 1.5 or a 1.3 audit, so they can do a bulk of the work and all the rest of it. And
albeit the auditor charges you a double audit.
No, they don't. Really?
Pretty much.
And that is why Kerry Price is in Auckland today. So you put that into the model, and for most of the New Zealand ones, I would assume like 75% is spent, and that the audit takes probably a month, 6 weeks. Then you've got to go in for what is the interim final certificate, which is exactly the same process as the final certificate. So allow your 12 weeks for Film Commission to review that, and then the final application just goes in on the normal timings after you've completed. And so what that meant for Richard's film is a savings, I think it was 145,000 in interest. And I've done another one recently, another TV series where it was a budget of about 10 million, and the savings on that, it was about 120,000. So it's significant, especially when they had actually budgeted. They had budgeted finance fees, so that was a massive gain going in at the very beginning. It doesn't work for everyone, so it is sort of best to sort of like work with your financier and figure out, like run the models, figure out what, if it does work. I would say sort of on the lower budgets, maybe not, but it's definitely worth looking at and considering. It's just amazing that the Film Commission have done this. Like, it's just absolutely incredible. And also it is, although they do go through the final process, what it does too for a financier is it lessens our risk. So, when you are talking to financiers, it's not as though they have all of that money out for sort of 18 months. There's a big chunk coming in, and then sort of like in that interim final that you're sort of going through the final certification process. So if there are any issues, they're going to be picked up pretty fast.
One of the things which I know you've deliberately done with Hinterland is to try to make your terms quite flexible, to make it easier for people to be able to change things as they're working their way through projects. Can you just talk to how that works in practice and what it means for people if they're thinking about drawing down on different parts of the finance plan and based on where the production's at? Yes,
absolutely. So the way that I've structured Hinterland is so that, because I get funding from a couple of sources, but my main source is North American based, and it flows through Hinterland as a New Zealand lending entity, so that if I'm cash flowing the grant, of course, like the financing fees are qualifying spend, but if I'm cash flowing something like on the rule of Jenny Penn, I cash flowed SPADA, AMC Studios and IFC. So that comes in through, the lending's coming in through Hinterland and out again, so that the financing fees are qualifying spend. I've just put that in there. I think that's it's really important to sort of know that, if you're dealing with an offshore financier, Then, of course, your grant is the financing fees are qualifying spend, but if you're cash flowing like a sales agent's advance or a distributor, then it won't be qualifying. So all of this I've sort of like put into the Hinterland loan agreement, which when I started, I said to my lawyers, I want my loan agreement to be 5 pages long. And they said, we think we can get it to 7. And it's 10 pages, but that's a cover page and a signature page, so we're not too far away. And there was a bottle of whiskey put on it. But it was an amazing process to go through, because you'd sort of think that the lawyers were not up for it. They were totally up for it. And they sort of like, we did a draft and really sort of went through what's really important, because there was in the Fulcrum loan agreements that I'd worked with for 15 years, there was a lot of stuff in there, but you can actually condense it down. But what we also put in there was the ability to change things around, like as you go through production, and especially like if you are changing your loan drawdowns, you can change the amount as well as the date. And so we put in that we could like change it by email sort of correspondence rather than having to do amendments or anything like that. So there's a lot of flexibility in there, and the flexibility for the interim payment to go in or be delayed out. So that's, quite important, I think, with the financing documents now.
Yeah, I mean, in a practical sense, it's been very valuable to us currently under the vines where we had the agreed drawdowns for the Spur loan, but because a GST return was processed faster than we anticipated, some fees were late being invoiced. It meant that we've been able to push out some of our Spur drawdowns, which again has reduced our interest cost. And you'd sort of think, well, delaying a drawdown of a couple of $100,000 by a couple of weeks, it's not going to make a huge difference. It does, given current interest rates are running at over 9% for a Spur loan. So any savings you can make in that actually has a very significant impact. Yeah, and I would say, like I would check in with the producer before loan drawdown and try and, really sort of like work the cash flow to when they really need it, not on the day of payroll, but the day before payroll would be great. But also the different types of loans and when you're going to draw those down, like if you've got a US dollar loan in there, if you're cash flowing a streamer and you've got US dollar payments at the beginning, do you draw your US dollar loan first or not? And so all of those things, just try and keep them really flexible so that you can, because things change in production, and I think if you really sort of set it in stone at the beginning, then it just ends up costing you money, really.
In terms of when you should be brought into the conversation as well, so if you're starting a production, at what point do you like to actually be involved in those discussions around how financing is going to happen, how drawdowns are going to occur, timing of those things?
I was just telling these guys that I think I've got multiple projects coming through in December and not closing anything at the moment, so I'm a bit stressed. But as early as possible, because then you can make sure that, are you maximising your grant? Have you got your holdback structured correctly? When are those holdbacks paid? Does that sort of ensure that the qualifying spend is all, you're maximising that? So I think as early as possible so that you can actually go through all of that, and quite often I'll be involved because you might need a letter of intent before you go to the Film Commission or go in for funding, and at that stage I can look at your finance plan and go, rename that's not right, this isn't quite right, and all the rest of it. So I think right at the very beginning, and I would just say all of that, I've been doing this for 25 years, so, draw on that. If you do need to pick my brains with those sorts of things, just, draw on my knowledge, and just how you actually set a finance plan out, how you sort of, before it actually goes into the Film Commission and all the rest of it, and maximising the finance in your finance plan.
Because I think you were telling me you were actually getting involved with the production accountant a few weeks ago and actually figuring out the timing of drawdowns and
that was really cool. I think because I'd say probably the last 5 years at Fulcrum, I'd really just run sort of the accounting team and the legal team, so you end up being a manager, and I'm not a manager. And so being much smaller in Hinterland, and you're at the coalface, which is awesome because you get to see what producers are actually dealing with and then actually helping. So on the feature film that I just recently helped close, and we had a 4-week sprint to close. And that was really fantastic because that was a lot of problem solving with the production lawyer, the lawyer at the Film Commission, and just really sort of looking at, okay, well, so I ended up taking over the cash flow drawdown with the production accountant and really maximising, like, when does Film Commission draw down? When do we draw down? And making it fair as well, so that Film Commission just aren't, like, in there sort of by themselves. And also, but making sure that they're drawing down when they really need to draw down from Hinterland so that they're saving interest, when all the reinvestments were timed, when other investment was coming in, just making sure it fits for everybody. And that was actually really fun.
With regards to reinvestments, I mean, there's some issues there around potential tax benefits and some risks there.
Yeah, I mean, the timing of reinvestments is critical. I mean, increasingly, less so on television, but increasingly in feature film, it's rare now that you'd see a finance pan without some form of reinvestment from the producer. And having been involved on a number of features in an EP capacity, I've seen a few pitfalls. The advantage we have in New Zealand, we are relatively unique in this. For an investment, in the year of completion, you can claim the tax deduction on that. So if you're investing $100,000, in that year of completion, depending on your tax rate, you could be claiming between 33 to 39% deduction. But you need income to offset that. And the risk is, if you're using your fees for that reinvestment, generally a film will be over at least 2 financial years. If you're paid in year 1, but you're not doing your reinvestment you're doing your reinvestment in year 2, what will happen is you're paying tax in year 1 on the $100,000 you've earned. Then you have a deduction from year 2, which you've got nothing to offset against. So you need to make sure that they're in the same financial year so that you don't have a tax liability, because otherwise, you're going to be substantially out of pocket. And that's what's key, not only to work with your financier, whether it be Sharon, Fulcrum, or Kiwibank, to make sure that your cash flow is clear and you're minimising those potential interest costs by timing your drawdowns, but also to get very good legal and financial advice, because there's also implications, particularly with reinvestment and investment around GST. And if they're not structured properly, it can be, you could be paying 15%. You could be liable for 15% on an investment if it hasn't been structured properly. So, I would certainly advise getting, and whilst it's expensive, it will, you pay it off very much in the long run of getting high quality tax advice.
Yeah, tax advice is key if you're going to be doing reinvestments. We all talk about reinvestments, but I actually see those as proper real investments from the producers and crew. If others are investing, because the fees that I see on the budgets in New Zealand are very different to the fees that I see on budgets overseas, say Australia, UK, and all the rest of it. So New Zealand producers do tend to be paid, with the exception of a few, a lot less than what I think offshore counterparts are. So I do believe, like we all say, it's a reinvestment. Those fees in New Zealand are not inflated, so I do think it's a real investment. Just like if you set up a company yourself, like your investors, your bank and all the rest of it would want to see you having skin in the game as well. So it's an interesting topic. I mean, personally, I don't like the reinvestments too much, because what I'm seeing is that the producers are being paid so little for years and years of work, and especially if that extends to like writers, directors and what have you, that's really quite tough. And also it's tough on if you've got a completion guarantor involved and all the rest of it as well. You're just really squeezing the financing and the production so that there's no air if anything goes sort of wrong.
With some of the other watch-outs we've been talking about too, so holdbacks Do you want to talk to those a little bit and the impact of those on?
Yeah, I've been asked recently quite a few times about holdbacks and how those are structured in the criteria. So the way that I would structure a holdback on a film where you're trying to maximise the grant would be you've got your loan in there, and it might be like 95%, and you might have some contingency in there, you may not. And then the excess grant, based on 100% of the anticipated rebate, including 100% of contingency, that excess is what you can use as your maximum holdback. And so the holdback really is just a holdback of fees or overhead, and you are paid that when the grant actually comes in. So it's not contingent, you will be paid when the grant comes in. So, and it can be confused with holdbacks that maybe lenders may want or other financiers. I know ABC in Australia used to do a lot of holdbacks on like contingency and overheads and all the rest of it. That's quite separate. And so when you get two lots of holdbacks on a production, it can get quite confusing. But with the holdbacks under the criteria, I can't remember which section it's like 21, 22, it's in there, and just make sure that if you're going to maximise that, it is the anticipated 100% of the anticipated rebate, including 100% of your contingency, and then minus your loan, and that's what your holdbacks can be.
I think an interesting thing to consider with holdbacks at the moment, given interest rates are so high, a holdback is a way potentially of reducing the amount you have to borrow from a lender as well. But I would certainly advise, if you're in a position as a production company and you have the cash flow, don't do a holdback, do a loan. You cash flow a percentage of, because essentially a holdback is cash flowing by you holding back your fees, a portion of the SPIC. Whereas if you have the cash flow in your production company, you're better to loan that money to the production because you can claim the interest on it and it is qualifying expenditure. So you're actually deriving some income on it, where if you're doing a holdback...
Steady, Richard.
You're obviously, it's dead money to you because you're not earning it and it's not deriving any income. So, in some respects, you've got to get into that financier mindset and think, how can I save money or how can I make money out of this? Because, your money has a cost just as much as everyone else's. So, make sure that you can try monetize it as best you can.
And also with the holdbacks, is there anything in the budget that can be actually, deferred until the rebate comes in? So quite often I would like to defer our legal fees because at the moment the legal fees aren't qualifying spend. So rather than put those in the budget and not being able to earn 40% on those, then I would just recoup those on loan repayment, which then reduces your holdback. It sounds very dry and very boring and very complicated, but it's just not. And honestly, if you ever get to needing to know all of that stuff, just call me. I love a spreadsheet.
Everybody loves spreadsheets. They're so much fun. Richard, when you're thinking about the maths of a project, I mean, when we're thinking about rebates and we see numbers like 20 or 40%, in reality, you're not actually optimising to those numbers, are you? So how do you?
I've obviously got a spreadsheet fetish as well, and I've done some analysis. I've looked at all the productions I've been involved in, both as a production company producer plus ones I've EP'd, and in general, if the production is a full New Zealand production, not a co-production, the spur would probably be worth about 36% to 37%. Obviously, if it's a co-production, it's going to be lower. If you've got a production with, say, a lot of stock footage or other elements that might be off, that will impact it. But generally, as a pretty solid rule of thumb, it's about 36%. 35 to 36 if you're being safe. And so you can sort of pretty confidently at an early stage, even before you've got a budget, go, I can put 36% in my finance plan. And you may actually want it to be less than 36% because you're not going to cash flow 100%. And that gives you a very good guide. And obviously the other beauty about, not on the figure side, but of the spur is if you're not qualifying as an official co-production, qualifying as a New Zealand production, you can definitively work out the content test, the cultural test at the start to know whether you're going to qualify or not. So it does give you in a position where you can go at an early stage with the project, say it's at a treatment or a pitch stage, and have a pretty good sense of what the finance plan is going to be, and talk to your market partners before you've actually gone to the expense of having a full budget prepared, etc. I guess, the one complication that has come out of the recent changes is the introduction of the above-the-line cap. I would certainly hope that the current rules are under a review in a year's time, that is something that's looked at, because I think it's going to have unintended consequences, particularly for non-scripted and low to mid-budget feature films. Particularly in the work I've done in factual space with the joint venture partner Perpetual, the shows that we've made with Griff Rhys-Jones, Jimmy Doherty, and the upcoming one with Phil Spencer, they have only got funded because of that international talent. If we didn't have that international talent leading it, we wouldn't have been able to secure the international finance. And the international finance, the cornerstone of that has been a Channel 4 and ITV sale. And they will only do that because there's something marketable in them for it. The huge advantage to the New Zealand economy of those projects is they are fully funded, they have this big, and outside of that, they're fully funded outside of the New Zealand market. We're not needing to go to New Zealand or NEO or others. But the downside, if you've got a name talent like that, particularly on a relatively low non-scripted budget, they are going to be disproportionately high and could very easily go over that 20% cap. And similarly, in the feature film space, where it's so hard at the moment and casting is key to secure finance, you could very easily see a situation where your above the line is going to get pushed up. And I'm sure there will be greater clarity on this, but at the moment there's not a lot of clarity in even what the definition of above the line is. Because often you'll see in a budget, above the line travel is included as above the line. I would argue that's not an above the line cost. That is a below the line cost. It's related to the above the line talent, but it's not. Above the line costs is talent fees, writing fees, etc. So I think there needs to be greater clarity in that space, and I know there is a sort of there is some conditionality on it, but conditionality is deeply problematic in this space. You need to know going to your market what is going to qualify, what's not going to qualify, because if you've got a situation going, well, the panel can show discretion in certain cases, that's not ideal. A black and white definitive test is much clearer. So I think I can understand why that was brought in, and there's reasons for it, but it will have unintended consequences, and it's something that we should all push to have reviewed and changed.
And I would say I'm seeing those unintended consequences already. I'm looking at a unscripted project at the moment that if the above the line wasn't reduced by the cap or limited to the cap, then it would almost be financed. It would be financed by now, but with that cap, it's just struggling. This project is struggling to get financed, and that's where I think it is worth. There is some discretion there, so I think it is worth talking to Film Commission because I think for those sorts of projects, there just needs to be some discretion, and especially because we were talking about this yesterday. In that project, there's an associate producer. Does that have to be above the line? Can you push that below? And I know that's not right, but it's pushing pushing the above the line costs so high that it's making it unfinanceable.
One of the topics, or one of the things you were talking about earlier, was having some flexibility in terms of thinking about which rebate to be using as well. And I think,
Yeah. Now that I've got time to think about all these things, I've been looking at the PDV, and if you don't qualify for the domestic rebate, then look at the PDV. Do you qualify for the PDV? There's a section in the criteria for the PDV that you can't have other government funding, so you probably so you can't go for Film Commission finishing funding and the PDV, which is a real shame because that's an opportunity for the Film Commission to actually leverage their funds off. So again, I don't know, in a year's time, hopefully we can talk about these sorts of things. The other thing that I think is super interesting at the moment and needs to be looked at and discussed is that the films that are being sold to streamers, but it's really sort of quite clear now that the streamers are wanting a limited theatrical release or a theatrical release because it's building like the marketing and building the value before it goes on to the streamer, then is that a TV project? And instead of which is just different criteria and all the rest of it, is it a TV project? But there is a theatrical sort of arm to it really. So I think a lot of those things can be discussed with the Film Commission now.
Another potential thing to consider if you're borderline near the threshold, and it's a way up because obviously there's a cost involved in this, but potentially, it might be easier to qualify as a co-production because the co-production threshold is based on the TPE, which is basically the full budget with a few exemptions, versus, say for argument's sake, you were making a one-off factual hour, and the threshold would be 500,000. It would be 500,000 QNZPE, but if you're doing it as an Australian-New Zealand co-production, it would be 500,000 TPE, so it's essentially the total budget. But then you have to weigh up the cost of, if I'm going to do this as a co-production, I'm going to lose some QNZPE because I'm going to have to do it in another country. I'm also going to have to add in fees. But in some cases, you can make the numbers work. So it's worth considering that flexibility. And I must say it was a big relief because there was concern with the review last year that there might be some restrictions placed around co-production. It's a huge relief that it's not, because co-production will be becoming increasingly important, particularly in respect of New Zealand on air and drama funding, I suspect.
On that QNZPE piece, are there any watch-outs that that people should be thinking about, or just tips, for instance, around wardrobe and?
I think most producers now, when they've done a few specs, are pretty aware. There's the obvious ones of Koha, entertainment, etc., that just don't qualify. But it's always worth. But then there's sort of grey areas. If it is Koha for, say, a location release, and you can get a receipt for that Koha, it's then qualifying. So it's just looking at those things very carefully. And I, for example, on every single production I do, I have the accounts department at the earliest stage in pre-production notify every department that we expect the majority of expenditure or all expenditure to be expended in New Zealand, and that if they have anything that is not to be spent on New Zealand, landed New Zealand costs, and if it's over $200, they have to get approval. So it's just to get that discipline in there, because I think it's very easy, particularly for wardrobe or art departments, just go, we can order it off Amazon, instead of trying to source it locally. Because it all adds up. You spend $10,000 in the art department on supplies that have come out, that's $4,000 of spur that you've lost. So it's just being very conscious of those things. But there are little quirks, particularly in terms of wardrobe. Say for argument's sake, you were making a period drama and there was military costumes you could get. The only place you could get them, because you couldn't afford to make them, was Angels out of London, the costume hire place. In theory, that may be able to qualify on the basis that the good is not available in New Zealand, and you can only source it from overseas. I don't wish to grumble, but there are a couple of annoying little quirks in there. For instance, a positive thing, there's no completion bond companies in New Zealand, so it's permissible that that the bond fees qualify because it's acknowledgement they're not in this market. We have no one here who provides accounting software, so we all tend to use on drama, obviously on non-scripted, productions do get away with using Xero, but we'll use the Moneypenny software. Where that is not eligible because the copyright is held in Australia. So I think there just needs to be a little bit more pragmatism around some of the interpretation of some of the QNZPE, and again, I'm not, I grumble because I think that the assessors have a tough job, and generally they do a very good job, but there is a bit of inconsistency amongst some of the assessors. Some of them tend to have pet beefs of areas that they will focus on. I remember, for example, when I was on this big panel, there was one assessor who found a Red Bull in a petty cache of a runner, and it's sort of, really, but I think, in a broader sense, maybe, we should be considering, we've had the system working how it has, and it has been working effectively, since 2008 when it was introduced, but should we be re-looking at it? Is the audit and the assessment process the best way of doing that, or is there double handling there? Is it efficient that we're waiting 3 months after you've done your audit, which will probably take a month at least for a drama, for the rebate to be paid? Is there a more efficient way? Because, and I don't say that purely from a producer perspective. I'm thinking, we now have a right-leaning government who is looking for cost efficiencies, are looking at places to find fault. If we could collectively work together to find a more efficient mechanism, so say that the spur could be paid out in a month and save the government 2 months of interest, and therefore reduce on average what they're paying out against the project, that's a win we can present to a government that is sceptical. Because I think, the risk that we do have, and I know there's a lot of you in the room here who are very concerned at the prospect of ACT being part of this government and ACT's very public position on the spur, which is frankly dishonest, because it is just patently wrong to say that if you remove this money, it could be used more efficiently in the economy, and you would still have a production base. If we remove the rebate, we are stuffed. If the rebate goes, and I suspect a lot of you in the room do not have a business. So ACT's position is dishonest. I think ironically we potentially have Winston Peters may be our friend. Who thought you'd ever say that? Because New Zealand's first position is very pro, but we need to be careful around the rebate, and we need to respect it, and we need to behave well and not abuse it to maintain it, but also look to manage it in the most efficient way. So I think there are little grumbles. I think generally it runs very well, but let's have a think about, is there a way we could make it even more efficient, and we can give a win to a government and say, look, we've saved you on average $2 million a year. And that might be $2 million that they're prepared to put into, back into the Film Commission or New Zealand On Air. So I think it's particularly, and Sharon can talk to this, compared to international, we're not a tax offset, so you don't get caught up in the tax system. We're not nearly as complicated, say, as the UK tax credit, which is just confusing because it says it's 25%, but it's actually 25% of 80%, so it's 20%. We're a really clean, simple thing, and it's great that it's been renamed the rebate and it's not a grant. But let's have a think. Can we make it even better?
And just on that, I would encourage you, like if you do have a query, especially at the very beginning, around what's qualifying spend or not qualifying spend or what do I do, honestly, pick up the phone to Catherine Bates and her team, not all at once, and do be kind to them because they are doing a great job. And but there's other people. I mean, there's myself, there's Kiwibank here in the market, there's the bond companies, there's Grant Thornton. We all know and we'll all share knowledge. So and the assessors and other producers. So just don't be afraid to ask if you're not quite sure, or how do I sort of structure this, or how do I do that. And ask questions. Don't just assume all the time. Just constantly ask questions. Poor Catherine. Is Catherine in the room? Oh, that's lucky. She'll probably growl me for that one. But I would really just say, just constantly test out. Just don't assume and all the rest of it.
Just on that, one of the things which I think can be a bit confusing for people. I mean, this is. When they're accessing finance, it is still fundamentally a loan that they're undertaking, that producers are undertaking, and there's guarantees associated with that. So just putting your banker's hat on for a second, can you just talk us through the guarantees, the implications, those components?
Yeah, so I guess it is still a loan, and it is debt finance, and there is security over the company, and you do absolutely have obligations. the way, because Hinterland is a media financing specialist, we ring fence that to the project, so we don't look to take security over your house and have your mortgage and have personal guarantees. Just be very careful about that. As an ex-Westpac banker, commercial banker, I can tell you that if the bank has got security over your house and all the rest of it, that they will use that if they need to. So there's a reason for it. I think when there are, on some of the larger loans, often we would take a corporate guarantee from the parent company. Now, that's not registered on the securities registered, but that just says you're going to spend the qualifying spend that you're doing, and you're going to produce the production on time and all the rest of it. And I think it's very similar, Richard, to there was producer sort of inducements in the UK. So it's very, we've managed to scale back the corporate guarantee to being sort of very bare basics. But I would say that was, you completely beat me up over that, you and Matt.
I don't like giving any form of guarantee.
Yeah,
at all.
Know that. Gosh.
Yeah, as my children know. But yeah, you want to try limit your risk. We actually have been fortunate in this market. It was much more aggressive in Australia when the offset was introduced, where some of the lenders were requiring personal guarantees, and thankfully that's never happened in this market. And you would normally only take a corporate security on television where there's not a completion bond. If there's a completion bond,
if there's a completion bond, then you don't need a corporate guarantee. It's if there's television and you're just securing, and especially if you're cash flowing something else as well, but you're just securing that one sort of that company. It just, it's not. We don't look at the corporate guarantee as providing a whole lot of collateral and security. It is just comfort that you've got skin in the game. You absolutely are going to do what you've said, and you're not going to sort of hide behind a limited company in terms of the production company. But just going back to, so when I first came out of university, nice and fresh, and went into Westpac, so because, and this is many, many, many years ago, and the team that I was working with had no time whatsoever for the problem loan clients. So I got landed with the problem loan clients and one who had actually come out of loans administration. So, this is 25 years ago, so only 1% of loans used to come out of loans administration. And they weren't happy to be in loans administration, but it's incredible to actually come out. And so dealing with those loans was such an incredible experience, because you're dealing with people that are very, very stressed and having to sort of do some financial magic there and making sure that their businesses still are running and all the rest of it. But, be under no illusion that, if the bank does have security over your other assets, even if you have security over your parent company, which may have rights and all the rest of it, if the bank needs to use that, they will.
Looking forward, and just actually looking at the market generally, what are some of the trends and opportunities you're seeing at the moment?
Going back to that first point, I think, the ability to co-fund with New Zealand Air is a game changer, because in theory, you can go to the market potentially with up to 70% of your funding in place, which is huge. But I do think, there's probably going to be a bedding down period, because, traditionally New Zealand On Air hasn't been in the international marketplace as much with multi-party co-financing. There's going to be a bit of a learning period for everyone. I've certainly experienced in the market, some quite strong pushback on New Zealand cultural criteria, New Zealand cultural requirements. And so there's going to be a bit of learning on both sides. So there may need to be in some cases, some relaxation around those cultural requirements. There may not. You look at the moment, there's three, which I think is fantastic. There's three major dramas, and it's the three major dramas that have basically sustained the crew over the last few months with no international work, being Broken Wood, My Life is Murder, and Under the Vines. All three of those shows, outside of the Spur, have no government funding. They are all funded by the market internationally. And they are all very strong cultural New Zealand projects. The New Zealand writing teams, the New Zealand lead actors, and there is that ground, there is that ability, but there will be friction at times. So I think that is an area that's just, we're all going to have to find our feet a little bit, but it's such an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that there's still definitely money out there. I think over the recent years, the way that money is actually coming into the production, like the distributors, we used to see huge distribution guarantees for Australian shows, but rather than those distributors cash flowing during production, they would be cash flow by a lender and pay on delivery, and often they would. They would contribute to the financing costs as well. I always see the co-production is quite a lucrative sort of area and all the rest of it. And I think she may be in the room somewhere. She's got 35 Canadians coming out to New Zealand next year looking for co-productions. And I think that's always a really interesting way to work, and especially with, even with the UK and being able to secure finance from over there. So I think that's definitely worth looking at.
I'll be slightly controversial. I think, as producers, we have evolved. We've had the Spur in some form, now for, 15 years or more. But I think we're really only starting to utilise it properly because, the funding mechanisms in New Zealand were very inward-looking. You could essentially be fully funded from New Zealand on air. The Film Commission used to, majority fund. So it was a very inward-looking funding system, a lot less so than Australia. But now, after people are now betting the Spur as the cornerstone of their finance, we've become much more outward-looking. But it's taken time, and I still think we've got a way to evolve on that now, because we all should be looking, if we can fund projects without the government agencies, it's going to be a much bigger funding pool for everyone. I'm not saying that every project should be funded without government funding, because there will be projects that absolutely require it. But it is great that we now are in a position where we have a number of non-scripted shows and a number of dramas that are just utilising the Spur and are not reliant on government funding as well. And that's something we should all be aiming for.
And leveraging that money as well, because there's not a lot of it. So, just even the regional film offices, Screen Canterbury is doing something, Film Bay of Plenty are raising money as well. So those sort of, can you get money out of your regions? And I guess it's it becomes an economic argument, and can you raise private money, or can you go out to iwi if you've got a project in the regions and all the rest of it? So thinking about it differently, because I do think the funding from Film Commission New Zealand On Air is static or will be going down. So as much as we can leverage that and use other, maximise the rebate and have other sources of funding, then I think it's better for everybody.
And just going back, something Grant said on the former panel about selling what we do well. When we have a government that is looking for cost efficiency, is very interested in international investment, we're actually a real success story. And you look at the Spurs, and as an example, that it is a requirement of that you're bringing in money, and we're a low climate impact industry. We're potentially bringing we're highly skilled, and we're bringing in a lot of money. We need to convince this government that we are their model industry. We're an industry that brings in a lot of money, and for relatively little impact and cost. And I think that's how we potentially will stabilise our situation, because I think with ACT there we do need to be conscious that there are risks, and so we need to sell what we do well, and convince government that this is an industry that they want to be part of.
Well, you've both got an awful lot of experience here, and I think we'd probably have a lot of people in the room who'd like to ask some questions of you while we've got access to your brains. So are there any questions out there in the room from the floor?
A couple of questions for Sharon. First of all, regarding Hinterland's financing, how does that stack up competitively with local banks like Kiwi Bank?
Did you say competitively?
Yeah, the interest rates.
Hinterland's probably a little bit more expensive because the source of funding, the North American bank that sits behind Hinterland, has a larger margin. That's because they can't borrow New Zealand dollars at the official cash rate or even at the 90-day cash rate. It costs them, quite a bit more to actually go out into the market and buy New Zealand dollars. But in saying that, I think that Hinterland is relatively competitive to the others. Where I think we differ from Kiwi Bank, and Scott's fantastic, and Josie, is that Kiwi Bank like to have a completion guarantor on board, whereas Hinterland's a lot more flexible. Hinterland will cash flow sales agents, distributors and what have you, whereas Kiwi Bank may do that if it's local, but they're definitely not going to go and sort of look at Netflix or Apple or Amazon or anything like that. So, and just, with that as well, and everybody has, different lending arrangements with Kiwi Bank, but if you're with a retail bank, then they will possibly have additional security over you.
Can I do my second question? Was about with regard to the interim payment, and you said you thought that when things were at the lower level, getting the spur, so maybe closer to the threshold for a feature film, they're around the 3 million level, that it might not be so worthwhile going for the interim payment. And I was wondering why that was, because the work I'd done on a project did make sense. And is that about a period, the length of production?
Yeah, it's about when you're drawing it down. I was sort of thinking more, maybe the unscripted or the documentaries and all the rest of it. When you're drawing, because quite often they will draw down maybe in post-production, so it's probably not doing, 2 audits so close together if you're sort of tracking towards completion delivery. So I think it really does work for the bigger productions, especially if you're drawing down. And we're seeing more productions draw down sort of in that pre-production period as well. So if you're drawing down in pre-production in the shoot, then definitely like the interim works. But if you're tending to draw down during post, then probably not.
I think there's an opportunity to look at the interim payments and say, actually, is an audit required, particularly on a larger budget project, because you're clearly going to be well over the threshold. The risk of you not qualifying is really not there. So do you actually need an audit at that? Is an audit required, or could there be another mechanism which could be a lot faster and a lot more cost-effective?
Especially if the assessors are going through it on a full process as well, because the assessors are a lot more thorough than an audit. It's quite different. So good question.
Richard, I don't know whether you can go into any more detail about the cultural problem. And by the way, Te Maanga Pāho qualifies as well as New Zealand On Air, doesn't it? Yeah.
This is not hearsay. It will horrify some in the room, but I have, and this is, very recently, sent a pilot script to a distributor, well-recognised distributor. And I'll be open about it. It was a pilot script based on Vanda Simon's one of her DC Shepherd novels. And the question from the distributor was, is there any Maori language in it? And I said, only in the sense of how it is used day to day in New Zealand. And they went through it forensically and was, what's this word, Pākehā? So they see it as a selling impediment. And I think the challenge there is, my simple answer was like, I can't not have that in a New Zealand context because it's part of the New Zealand vernacular. So you may just have to shoot 2 versions, an international version and a local version. And I would hope, as more and more New Zealand content gets out, it becomes less an issue. Also, using another example on Mystic, we had a whole storyline through Series 2 about a young Maori boy who was disconnected from his his cultural background and was learning the language. Because it was so embedded in the story and an integral part of the story, no one saw it as an issue. And ironically, our German broadcaster came back and wanted more. So it's very contextual, and I think it is the big issue for distributors is subtitles, and the sense of foreign language is alienating, and it's not directly aimed at New Zealand or Māori language. It's just a problem that they don't like subtitles and they want everything to be English and simple. But also now I'd hope it's changed. I mean, I can talk my own watching habits, and this is, to say something positive about Netflix. I think we probably all watch a lot more foreign content than we used to. So you would hope over time it's going to become a lot less of an issue.
Richard, I think you might have just answered my question, which was about the pushback on cultural criteria that you mentioned. Was that it? Yeah, thanks.
I think we're done. So thank you very much for both of you for giving us your knowledge and wisdom. Really do appreciate it. Any
Welcome.
final thoughts? Or? Thank you.